Hi, welcome to Peace Day South Africa. Thank you so much for joining us. A very exciting broadcast ahead of us. We're at Liliesleaf Farm in Rivonia, Johannesburg. And we'll be discussing briefly peace and reconciliation, as well as equal development and reconciliation in South Africa. Our panelists, very briefly, include Mr. Ahmed Kathrada, Justice Yvonne Mokgoro, Archbishop Thabo Makgoba, Mr. Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, and Ms. Kay Sekhwale. And we'll be running in very briefly. The structure of the moment is I will be asking questions to the panelists. The panelists will respond, and then we'll take questions from the audience at the end or afterwards. So very briefly, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Ahmed Kathrada to do a brief introduction, and then we'll follow through with the rest of the panel.
My first protest is when they say brief, because we were deprived of freedom of speech for so many years, 26 years, and now we are told that we must be brief. So, no, briefly, this is where we were arrested on the 11th of July, 1963, together with Walter Sisulu, Governor Mbeki, Raymond Mhlaba, and others. But if you go around later on, you'll see exactly where we were arrested. But you'll hear more about us when you go around.
Thank you, Mr. Kathrada. Justice Mokgoro.
My name is Yvonne Mokgoro, and I'm a former judge at the Constitutional Court and currently also an advocate for social cohesion, the program that is driven by the Department of Arts and Culture. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you, Justice. Archbishop.
Thank you. My name is Thabo Makgoba, the Anglican Archbishop of Cape Town. I am also passionate about peace with justice, and it is my dream that we will attain it in our time. Thank you.
Thank you, Archbishop. Sizwe.
My name is Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh. I'm a co-founder of InkuluFreeHeid. Really glad to be here on this day, and not just to be here, but to be here with this panel. I think freedom fighters from all generations, and hopefully freedom fighters from this generation as well. So I'm very glad to be sharing this moment with all of you at this time and at this place.
Thank you, Mr. Mpofu-Walsh. Hand over to Mr. Sekhwale.
My name is Gananelo Sekhwale. My friends call me Kay. You can call me Kay as well. I'm very honored to be here. I am somebody who has recently found her voice, or in recent years, in terms of speaking out against injustices that happen in our society, and also just living my truth and trying to find ways and means to make South Africa a better place.
Thank you. Just to repeat again how this works, I'll pose the first question to our panelists, and we'll answer in the same order. So, Mr. Kathrada and the rest of the panel, very briefly, what does the idea of a day of peace internationally mean to you? And what would you say are the opportunities that a day of peace creates for people and citizens around the world?
The world, but our country as well. There are so many conflict areas in the world. However, for the last few weeks, we've been hearing about the use of chemical bombs and so forth. But in our own country as well, there's a great need for peace, because it's a different kind of, someone has described it as a low-level civil war, with these service delivery protests and so forth. So peace has got a very wide connotation and applies to us equally in the country and internationally.
Thank you, Mr. Kathrada. Justice Mokgoro?
For me, You know, Peace Day really draws sharp attention to the fact that the creation of even world peace is not just the responsibility of powerful world leaders. The creation of peace is in the hands of regular people, individuals, and regular communities. And that's what Peace Day brings to our attention. And for advocates of social cohesion, you know, when there is peace, people are able to transcend their differences and work together, holding hands, working for peace in peace. And that's important.
Thank you, Justice. Archbishop?
For, for me, of course, this is the United Nations concept that was agreed on in 1981, where we are encouraged as nation states and as individuals and communities to bring, as Judge Mukhoro said, a sharp focus on peace, and to actually remind ourselves that we don't only need those big organs of states, but we as individuals can attain that peace. It's like what one of the best speakers in those olden days said, if you throw a stone into a pool, it sends concentric circles, and those circles can have an enormous impact on the outside of that little pond. So peace starts with me, and peace starts with you. It's like each time when I reflect on this day, I say, Lord, heal our land, but begin with me. So it's that sharp focus that you are not a helpless individual waiting for the state or big organs of the United Nations to bring about peace, but you have to find peace within you.
Thank you, Archbishop. Mr. Walsh?
I think for me, I always reflect on a day like this and moments like this in terms of our own context in South Africa and our own country. And I think the question of peace globally in South Africa is tied to the notion of how we came together under the banner of reconciliation in the constitutional transition. And I think since then, South Africa has, in a sense, lost its way. That project hasn't been at the forefront of every citizen's mind. And I think sometimes what we've tried to do is say, we need peace and we need cohesion, so let's talk about that. But what I feel we need in South Africa is, and when I think we'll really come together to find peace, is when we focus on taking the country forward together. I don't think you cohere when you put people in a room and you say, cohere now, please. You cohere when you say we all care about something and something is common to all of us. And it's time that we stand together to fight for that thing. And I think where our generation finds itself is, how do we create that thing that we all want to fight for that brings us together? And I think the Rivonia trialists are such an incredible example of social cohesion. You had 4 white people who were arrested amongst the 12. You had a Muslim person. You had people from different Xhosa, Zulu backgrounds. Why were they coming together? Not because they were in a room wanting to cohere. They came together because they were fighting for a new South Africa. And I think that's how our nation is going to cohere in the future. And that's why today is important to me.
Thank you, Mr. Bosch. Ms. Sekhwale?
South Africa is a place, as you've heard from all the other speakers, that comes from a lot of turmoil and not having peace. I grew up at a time when there was no peace in this country, and unfortunately we find ourselves in a situation sometimes in society where we don't find peace within ourselves, or the social problems that exist within South African society are very concerning, and they bring, they evoke that sense of wanting justice, wanting peace in South Africa and globally as well, looking at situations around our world that are not peaceful. So it's very important for all of us as a world, as we proceed, to find peace, both starting first of all within ourselves and then finding ways to bring peace to others as well.
Thank you. Thank you to our panelists. That was the first of 3 questions. I think I'll now pose the second question. The ultimate goal of Peace Day is that human beings around the world all stand together, united behind the cause of peace. And what benefits do you see coming from that? And what is the importance of that united position?
Second World War ended, we were told that was the war that's going to bring permanent peace. The opposite has happened. So that we still have conflicts, as I said earlier, many parts of the world we have wars going on. I suppose historians will be able to judge to what extent we have really succeeded. But to laypersons like us, there is very little of what they had aspired to do with all the conflicts going on.
Thank you, Mr. Kathrada. Justice Mokgoro?
You know, once you have created peace, you automatically have an environment where, as I said earlier, you can transcend your differences, and once you've done that, it is fertile ground for understanding each other, having conversations where you respect each other. And once you have that opportunity for respect, mutual understanding, you're able to work together for the common good of everybody. A common good which you will have identified through respectful conversations with each other. You cannot do that if you don't have peace with each other. And as Kay said, before you can achieve peace with others, you need to find peace in yourself. Because it is when you have peace in the hearts and the minds of people that you can work together and find a common good which will benefit everybody. And we need that kind of environment, fertile ground, as I say, for social cohesion.
Thank you, Justice Mokgoro. Archbishop Makgoba?
Thank you very much. I think standing together can be broken into many various parts, but I just want to highlight two aspects. One, the physical standing together. Yesterday, just outside Freedom Park, we had a human chain, and we held each other's hands, and the simple gesture there was, as it was said earlier on, it is important to face the person who's different in the eye, whether in terms of gender, religion, creed, or any other artificial divide. You stand there, you physically look at someone in the eye, and you have a different sense of their dignity and who the other is, rather than texting the other, rather than seeing the other through the IT. And you feel that their dignity, their longing, hook onto your own dignity and your own longing. That is the first one, the physical standing together. But the other standing together means we will be united as nations and as peoples and as communities to say, never again should a child, well, if you ask an archbishop, I'll obviously quote the sacred texts. In all our sacred texts, we uphold the dignity of each person as created in the image of God or the divine. And so when you say we're standing together, you'll say, never again should anybody who's created in the image of the divine be demeaned by those who have greed, by those who want to promulgate the arms industry, by those who want to abuse children because the sex industry wants to blossom. You say, we're holding together and say, we belong, we have to flourish, we have to cohere as God's people and as different members of society.
Thank you, Archbishop. Mr. Mpofu-Walsh.
Thanks. I think in terms of the question of what the importance of peace means, for me, I think it's a foundational concept. There are a lot of challenges that we face in South Africa and in the world. You know, how is democracy really going to work for its people? And we've seen those kind of challenges expressing themselves in the Arab Spring. How is the economic system that we have globally going to work for more people and not just a few people? But you can't start addressing those fundamental challenges, challenges of social justice, of access to basic water, service delivery, until you have a foundation of stability, a foundation of peace in South Africa and in the world. So before we want to get onto these important questions of access to social justice, access to equality, first we have to create a foundation of peace. And I think South Africa is an interesting test case and an example of a country that traded off perhaps even justice for peace. It said, look, first we want peace, then we can get to the other stuff. And if I don't say so myself, I think we're doing better than a lot of other countries because we made that decision. And I think that that's something that we all need to understand and appreciate, because often our peace and reconciliation project is kind of spoken down upon. You know, we think we should have had justice first and all of that, but that's been tried. This hasn't been tried. And so far, I think it seems to be working relatively well if you look at conflicts in other places in the world.
Thank you, Mr. Mpofu-Walsh. Mr. Khwale?
Peace for me is something that has been a long time coming to this society of ours, and for some people it doesn't exist. We have examples set for us in society by the Rivonia trialists, starting with people like Uncle Kathy and Nelson Mandela and others who were tried with them. And their generation imparted upon us the message of reconciliation and finding peace through forgiveness and finding it within ourselves to forgive others in order to be peaceful ourselves. It's a challenge, I must admit, and I think a lot of us find it very challenging to just blanketly forgive and move forward. But the lesson that they have taught us, our generation, but also the younger generation, which we need to also impart, is to really find a way to make things work without necessarily seeking revenge. Retribution is fine up to a certain perspective, but finding ways and means to move forward and forgive people. Forgiveness is key, and it's a very, very big ask that they made of South African society. But I think in our own small ways, we are finding our ways to that space of forgiveness, but more importantly, asking for forgiveness. We have a whole generation of people living amongst us who have not asked for our forgiveness, and so it becomes very difficult to give them that peace that they require as well. And in order for them to find peace, I think it's important that they also need to find ways to seek forgiveness from those that they've wronged and to introspect. I think peace is about introspection as well. And we can't, none of us really can advocate for peace if we ourselves cannot be peaceful.
Thank you, Mr. Khwale. And we now move to the third and final question, and perhaps the most important. Given that the success of national and international peace, and in particular of a peace day such as today, comes from individuals making the decisions, as you've reiterated as a panel, what is it that inspired you as an individual to take up the fight for peace, take up the fight for justice?
Well, the conditions in South Africa, our forefathers have been trying their very best to bring about a peaceful settlement. They tried petitions, resolutions, delegations. Instead of positive responses from the other side, responses were always more and more harsh. In there was a whole lot of laws that made it more and more difficult to have a peaceful transition. Until 1960, when both the ANC and the PAC were declared illegal, and then coupled with banning of individuals, it just made it impossible to carry on a peaceful forms of protest. That is when Mr. Mandela, when he was underground, gave the first hint when he said this is after a peaceful strike was crushed by the police and the army. That is when Mr. Mandela said that time has come when we must open a new chapter. And he gave the first hint of the need to embark on an armed struggle in South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. Kathrada. Justice Mokgoro.
You know, I have always known that the basis for the struggle against apartheid oppression has always been the fight for human dignity. And human dignity is in turn the basis for social justice. So when we attained our freedom after all the struggle led by people like Ahmed, Kathrada, Nelson Mandela, Govan Mbeki, and all those legendary forefathers and foremothers of our struggle, it was expected that we would recreate, deconstruct the indignity of apartheid, reconstruct human dignity under the freedoms that we have attained. And we have done tremendously well. Considering where we're coming from and considering where we are, we have managed to bring about a formidable, stable democracy with a constitution revered throughout the world. We have created a nation which, by all counts, has an economy which can cater for all. It has the potential to do that. However, I think we must make peace with ourselves that we have not been able to achieve that society which is envisioned in our Constitution. And we need to work towards it with utmost speed. And that is what drives me as a person. Every day when I wake up, I always ask myself, what can I do today in my calling as a jurist, in my everyday lifestyle as a peacemaker and an advocate for social cohesion? What can I do to ensure that we have these conversations with each other and identify areas which still need to be worked at? The huge wealth gap, the disconnect between men and women based on violence against women, against children, particularly girl child. There are so many aspects of our lives today, despite our achievements, that still need attention. The disconnect sometimes between young people and the older generation, where young people sometimes feel despondent about the direction that our democracy is going. We need to have these conversations. We need to identify areas and find ways of getting the society where we ourselves, through the social contract, which is our Constitution, envisaged for ourselves.
Thank you, Justice Mokgoro. Archbishop?
For me, I think what Justice Mokgoro and Ahmed Kathrada has said are important pillars of what motivates me to want peace with justice. One is the past painful system of exclusion that demeaned communities and individuals' human dignity, and at a personal level, I recall being in the back of a truck with my parents and the furniture, and we were moved from Alexander Township to Soweto because Alex was declared a white area. So that was very dehumanizing, seeing my father and my mother traveling all the way because somebody had decided the policy could remove blacks because a particular area is a white spot, and the pain of dislocation. And the other pain from the past is, I'm in a township fellow. I get relatively good marks from Orlando High, and I apply to WITS, and WITS says, it is darky, you can try. And at that stage, WITS says yes, but we had to apply to the Minister of Education to get a ministerial approval. And he says, oh, no, this darky must go to TEFLOP. And now you're in a crisis. And this is like partly a confession. So he had to write nice lies, say, my mother that died last year has got sugar diabetes this year. So that you can convince the minister. So the minister will say, he will not reply, but around April, May, when you started at TEFLOP, he replies and said, yes, it's too late. So for 2 years, we did that. But the fortunate thing is TEF then started conscientizing some of us to say, this thing is wrong. There's an injustice there. The other painful thing is, again, in democracy, when Judge Yvonne Khoro, I'm just throwing some of those snippets, presided over a case that touched the core of my human being, and I was a pastor. It was a gentleman by the name of Mabote who had raped a young child, and he was released on bail, and he went back and got that little child, Mamoketi, and then killed her. And I said, no, something is wrong. But I can't wallow in negativity and the fact that something wrong has been done to me because I'll be depressed, because depression is nothing else but anger turned inwards. So there is a vision that justice is possible. Our Constitution and the values in the Constitution for respect, for dignity, for freedom, and of course, drawing from our own sacred text, says freedom and peace are possible. So those two pillars create a dynamism within me to say, we will be able to attain peace with freedom. Let me add my little energy to ensure that never again should people also experience some of those negativities. Although we're not yet there, but we can't lose a sense of vision, because where there is no vision, the people perish.
Thank you, Archbishop. Sizwe in 30 seconds, and then Kay in 30 seconds.
I think what inspires me is knowing that, let me put it this way, we're playing on a soccer field, right? And Uncle Kathy's generation was surrounded by 5 defenders. And somehow they dribbled their way out. They shoved the defender off and played it to the midfield. These other generations like Justice Mokgoro and Archbishop Makhobas, and they've played us the perfect through ball. And we're standing in front of the goalkeeper. All the generations before us just need us to slot the ball home. And that places a huge responsibility on us to say, look at what we've inherited and look at the people that we've inherited this from. Can we let not only them, but ourselves down by not at least, fagaring Ishibobo one time? And I think that's what inspires me, along with the other young people who feel the same way. And I think sometimes their generation doesn't know. There are young people who feel, thank you, and who want to take what you've given us, who want to take that through ball and capitalize on it. And that's what inspires me in terms of today.
Thank you, Sizwe. Ms. Khwale, parting words.
What inspires me is having been raised by legends and having the privilege of being raised by legends. And some of those legends are people who sit in government today. They are people who have previously sat in government and work in various parastatals running very big South African projects. And those people made such an influence on my life. But sometimes I see them veering from the path that they started to put for us moving forward. And veering from that path in a very dangerous way that brings to mind some of the injustices of the past, thinking to myself, how do we prevent a situation where we cannot allow the oppressed to in turn become the oppressor? And I think in having experienced something very traumatic at the age of 8 at the one of the raids, the cross-border raids that the SADF, took upon the ANC, I was the youngest survivor at the Maseru raid in 1982 and very badly injured. And that was a life-turning moment that politicized me from that day. I had no choice but to consider what was going on around me and also grow up to become somebody who cares and who cannot allow injustices to repeat themselves. It's very easy, I know, to be comfortable and to just go on with life. I'm a media practitioner, and to pretend as if all of this is not happening and live a happy-go-lucky life. But thankfully, I have a conscience, and then conscience is set about by the people who came before us in terms of making sure that one is conscientized enough. So what drives me in advocating for peace is really that background, and never forgetting, never, never, never forgetting, and saying again, like the Archbishop, never again.
Thank you, Mr. Khwale. And as we come to the end of this live global moment, I just want to say thank you to our panelists, thank you to the global audience, as well as our audience here for joining us. I think that what's clear is that as a country we have a long way to go, but also that as a global society we have some way to go, but we as individuals can make a substantial difference. Thank you so much for joining us.